Cool. Hi guys, welcome back to the Azure Well-Architected Framework. And currently we are diving deep into the pillars, and the pillar that we are focusing on at the moment is called the security pillar, right? And the opening remark is, do we consider security as the first or last consideration when we are implementing design, right? If we do that, I think if you look at the picture on the right hand side, you actually see the cost implication when you kind of have security breaches and all of that. While I talk through the information, you guys can just look at the numbers and see if you can afford those, and if you can afford to treat security as a side cut in your implementation. Cool. Uh, in your designs, when you kind of implementing your architecture design, you want to specify security practices in your design. What does that mean? You need to have security plans that basically specify core. This is the kind of security measures we're gonna implement, agree them with business to say, cool, this is what the customer wants in terms of securing our system, right? As an architect, you need to also apply yourself and say, cool, based on the factors that surround this kind of industry or whatever the case might be, these are the security measures we need to specify. Obviously, there's a huge element here of budget that we need to look into. So this security plan or security specification should be done within a budget frame, essentially, right? The other thing that we need here is an incident response plan, right? Basically establish that in your designs to say, cool, when we have a security issue, how do we handle it, right? The last thing that you want is to get people running around essentially being uh, confused regarding what needs to happen, right? In a chaos situation, you actually want people to have an orderly kind of way of handling the incident and basically being able to reflect back and learn from it. Then we have segmentation as an idea as well that you can do. So think about this in a sense of cool. We have a payment processor, for argument's sake, that takes debit orders out of customers' accounts, right? That debit order system, technically speaking, you don't need to put it as your front end system that onboards your debit order or sets up your debit orders. Why? Because the one will be customer facing and you don't want people changing your parameters on the fly or having access to that particular system, right? So you could decide to segment it into a separate system. Why? Because if they attack the customer facing solution, you have another security measure where they need to infiltrate your segmented portion as well, right? This limits the blast radius essentially of exposure whenever there's a security incident. Think about cases where you have sensitive information or super sensitive information in your solution. You kind of want to split that into its PII kind of conforming standards, and obviously PII information will then have more security around it and all of that. So that segmentation actually helps you with splitting costs across the board, right? Then other things that you need to do in this particular case is how are we going to handle how are we going to handle issues in terms of our coding standards? What are our standards around that? You kind of need to have ideas around uh, having code scanners that actually analyze your code and see what you have initially in your what packages you use in your code. Are you having passwords and secrets, connection strings stored in an unsecured manner, right? Those kind of consistent checks, scanning of your code actually helps with improving your security posture, right? Who has access to production? How do you grant access to production? Those kind of things actually play a role in terms of your security exposure. I think if you remember, there's a Microsoft situation that happened where a user's account essentially had access to a tenant, and basically the hackers were able to create another user account and assign permissions to that, then use that to hack, right? Cool. Then the next point that we need to talk about is access restriction. I think I mentioned bits and pieces of that. Okay. So as I mentioned, Be strict with your access. Figure out exactly what measures you need to put in place. Do not just apply a blanket rule to say least privilege. You need to define what least privilege means in your space, right? Think about what happens if a user, what happens if an employee has issues with the company. Will they be able to access the information? Can they sell the information externally because they want to put the company in disrepute, right? Those kind of things. How do you handle them? How do you go about? There is measures that you need to put in place essentially to achieve those kind of things. Some people follow strategies like masking and all of those kind of things. So really think about what you do in that particular front. And the other point that I'm going to talk about is prevent against corruption, right? This literally means customers' assets must be protected at all times, right? What are customers' assets that I'm referring to? It can be the code itself, right? It can be the data. It can be the actual flow of information in the system that gets corrupted, right? You don't want an intruder to corrupt your customer's database, right? Let's say, for example, your database, your customer or your employee essentially works with archiving data, right? Imagine if they delete the archive, what then happens? You have issues because the primary service that you're offering is completely uh, null and void, essentially, right? If someone hacks and puts a script inside your business logic, what happens? Let's say, for example, you are a take a lot or whatever, and someone puts a JavaScript in there that then gives you a discount, 100% discount. Now, all of a sudden, you get orders that go through with a corrupted value, right? So you don't want those kind of thing. Then there's an idea of maximus uptime using security, right? Why uptime? Why security? Think about exactly what I meant in the previous video, where you have a DDoS, right? If you have a DDoS, the idea with well-architected frameworks is that you shouldn't block users who are genuine, right? Genuine users should always have access to their data or data in the system. So that means you need to not switch off the system because there's an attack, but you rather need tools and mechanisms that help you to essentially manage whatever issues that might be coming across, right? Then finally, continuous improvement. I think that one is pretty straightforward, right? Continuous improvements is continually update your libraries, update your dependencies, scan your code, increase your security postures, right? If there's new tools that are out there in the market that help against a particular issue, right? Be able to actually improve your solutions, right? Identify critical issues or identify security issues with severity levels, right? Those with critical levels uh, should be handled with agency, right? Some companies, what they then do is they hire ethical hackers to periodically just try to hack the system and see how far they get, right? You need this kind of disaster recovery or tests that will take place and kind of test your disaster recovery plan and see if it is fit for purpose in terms of what happens when we have a security breach. Cool. In the Azure space, there's a lot of things that you can do. I'm just going to touch on a couple of basics, right? You can, for example, when you start looking at things like access control between your database server and your API, for argument's sake, what do? People normally what they'll do is they'll take a connection string with a primary key or whatever the case might be from the database and log in with that, or they'll create a user called admin with a password admin and hope for the best that we don't hack that with that particular password, right? But then what do? You then deploy something called managed identities. Instead of using secrets and passwords, managed identities are more secure because in that particular flow, it is the app service itself that is authenticating against the database, right? Obviously, this is not a what do you call it? This is not the only approach, or this is not the maximum security that you can apply. If a user can execute code inside your app service itself, then you have issues, right? The issue changes or the scope actually moves elsewhere. You have the idea of applying Azure networking to prevent unauthorized networks, right? You need to have security measures on different levels of your application, from your data, your application itself, multiple layers that we know of, physical layer and the likes, right? So what do? You deploy Azure networks across internal systems. So think about it from your database to your API. Nothing else should be talking to your database besides the API or whatever other backend system that you have. So you only allow connections to your database or whatever using Azure networks. And the other idea is cool. Have firewall rules. Typically for your daemon applications, you kind of set firewalls rules. If this thing is an internal solution, what can you do? If your company has a VPN of sorts or a corporate network, you can actually set up firewall rules on your applications to only allow traffic from specific locations. Then if you don't want to do this on per app service kind of level, you can then go and say, cool, I will deploy a what do you call it? An Azure application gateway kind of thing where you set the rules on the gateway level, and basically the filtering happens on that level, and your applications do not really have that setup. There's a extra security measure. You can set it on both levels if you really want to. Least privileged, I kind of mentioned it, who has access to your production environment, how much access do they have, what sort of information do they have. You need to actually classify that data sets that you have in production to say, cool, are they super sensitive? Can they put the company in disrepute and all those kind of things, right? Are they confidential information? Something to pay attention to is there is some proprietary information that is specific to the company that you might not want to expose. And in that particular sense, there is a lot to consider when it comes to security. That's why we say specify it in your design, right? Understand exactly what you are covering against, understand what the minimum requirement or the requirements are from business, along with the budget that comes with it. Cool. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good one. Next video will be on a separate pillar, right? We might be going into operational excellence. But thank you very much for tuning in.